Welcome everybody to another ATCRE CPD Zoom event. Just to remind you, we are recording the session, and when it's been processed, it'll be up on our website with the slides and any other resources that James cares to share with us in a couple of days' time, but you'll get an email letting you know. So welcome. I see some usual suspects, regulars, so you're very welcome. And yes, I've had a beard trim before anyone puts it in the chat, and I'm very happy with it. Thank you. So tonight we have James Trewby, who is leading us in this session. He has spent a lot of time preparing it. It's more interactive than perhaps normal. So we've got a couple of breakout rooms to go to. And but when James is speaking, he will invite sometimes people to speak. So unmute yourselves, and that's it. So James, thank you very much for agreeing to speak tonight. James works for the Columbans, and he's their Justice and Peace education worker, and we've got a very interesting session tonight. Over to you, James.
Hello everybody. Please could you wave so I know you can hear me? Excellent. And there's about half of you that I can see. Oh, more people are becoming visible. Go on, Phil, let's see what you're wearing. And Terry's here. How wonderful. All right, thank you all for being here. I'm a little bit scared of the technology, so Julia is here and helping me with technology. So let's see if all that behaves itself. We're together for about an hour, slightly less, hopefully. We called it Beyond Charity, but I liked the subtitle that we came up with. Julia, would you mind displaying the subtitle? Very tongue-in-cheek. Oh no, something bad is happening. Let's do a cake sale. So the kind of, if you were to be here for only a minute or two and then you're going to hang up on me, the key thing we're exploring is how do we make sure that when we're doing charity in school, that we kind of get some learning out of it, that it fits in with the kind of formation that we're trying to do for our young people. And how do we go beyond charity? What are the possibilities there? So I've said to create a space to explore the whys and hows of going beyond charity. But the first thing I wanted to do is make sure that you all know how wonderful you are. Before I go on and kind of suggest other things that you might want to try, Julia, would you show them their first flattering slide, please? This was trying to capture how wonderful you've all been during this crazy time. And it doesn't capture half of it. Like, I've been lucky enough to go into schools during this time and seeing the kind of collection of food, the breakfasts for all the kids in the school, the visiting of the kids at risk, I cannot say enough how amazing you have been during this time and how your vocation has become even more than it was before. So before I go on with various suggestions about other things you might want to experiment with, let me appreciate what you do first. And I found this next slide, which was a lovely little definition of educator. Someone who has so much hope for the future, they spend their life preparing others to make a positive difference. Yeah, I think I've flattered you enough, so I can now start saying more challenging things. Do you mind going to the next slide, please, Julia? And this just sets out where I'm coming from. So I was once a proper teacher. I didn't stick in it for very long. I was a primary school teacher first, and then I joined the Salesians, a Catholic religious order, and I was teaching in their secondary school up in Bolton. And from there, I kind of went off to the novitiate, and then eventually I left religious life and ran away to the Philippines and spent a year living in a slum in the Philippines that was really part of the kind of my radicalization, I suppose. There's a word you're not supposed to use in schools. We're going to use that a lot tonight. Then I was working for the Salesians for a number of years. And then I started a PhD, and I did a PhD looking at life stories of activist educators. So there's going to be various bits and pieces woven in tonight from that. And now I have this fantastic job with the Columbans, Justice and Peace education worker. So let me say now I am available for inset. Get that advert in straight away. And I have the best job in the world, and I hope I'll be able to share a little bit of that as we go through. I'm married with 2 small children. I'm married to a lady, and I have 2 small children. And I would say I'm a bit of an activist too, and I hope you'll kind of see how these things weave together. Then I was a bit afraid that you might be nervous. You might be, no, I'm nervous. You might be bored by this stage. So this is your first joke of the evening. If you prepare yourselves, I'm sure you all know it, and you can unmute yourselves and join in. What's the nun's favorite? What's the pirate's favorite prayer? I'm waiting for anyone to unmute themselves. I can see Matt. I can see you mimed it, but you didn't say it. The Our Father, excellent. You got there, but you were going to do more of an R, yeah? R. Brilliant. Okay, next slide is where it gets a bit more serious, I'm afraid. We are moving into a workshop. I came to Sister Judith's one and I was petrified because I thought you lot are going to expect me to do a full-on lecture. And I'm afraid that I find at 4 o'clock at the end of a day in school, a lecture wouldn't be the most effective from me. So it is going to be a workshop. What's going to happen in a moment is you're going to be moved into groups of roughly 5. You're going to get in there and you're going to pray that everyone unmutes themselves and puts their camera on. And if they don't, I want you to shame them in any way they can until they, no, don't do that. Just be gentle with them. And you're going to do a game of people bingo. So in real life, I've done this with head teachers and they're all running around a room trying to find someone to fill in the names on this sheet you see in front of them. The way we're going to do it tonight is a Google form, which will appear in the chat. Look at that. So you'll click on that and in your small group, it's going to be can you find someone to fill in all those gaps? So for example, someone who has raised awareness about something on social media, someone who is passionate. The issue passionate about, when I did this with head teachers, they almost all said more holidays. So you can see the commitment levels we've got going on in Catholic education. I'd be interested to know about who's boycotted, who's been on strike. Anyway, so this is where we start. You have up to 5 minutes in your little group of 5. Matthew, please, would you press the magic button so they're all taken away? Okay, the next thing we need to do is pray, and I'm afraid that starts with another high quality joke. So Julia, if you could bring the slide back up. How do we know that Jesus likes reptiles? The clue is in the picture. You are going to have to unmute yourself. You can win 1 free look at Matthew's beard if you can answer this question.
George.
How do we know Jesus likes reptiles? Because of the prayer he taught us. I see laughter. I'm pleased. That's good. And what do they eat? Let us pray. Let us pray. You see, this is why he booked me. So what we're going to do now is we're going to share a prayer from Fratelli Tutti, which captures some of the themes that come from our thing tonight. So Julia, if you would mind bringing up that prayer. Matthew, if you would lead the first half of the prayer. And I believe, who said they would do it? Jennifer, you said you would read the second half. There we go. So this was an excuse to get you onto the Columban website, everybody, and to kind of give you a taste of what we do. So you can see kind of people at the border fence in the States there. You can see people in Peru. You can see people feeding people in Birmingham, climate strikes, all sorts. Matthew, if you would lead us in prayer, please.
In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war.
May our hearts be open to all the people and nations of the earth. May we recognise the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. Amen.
Amen.
In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you both. Okay, we're going to now find out what you wrote on those forms. We're going to see what names were put down, because with any luck, using the technology, I can see your answers. Let's have a look. Issues we're passionate about. Jennifer, you've just been brave enough to unmute yourself. Would you mind doing it again? What are you passionate about?
I put myself down for that because there's probably lots of things I could put there. So I've been sort of focusing a lot on environmental issues at the moment, but also things to do with peacemaking. We're having a month of peace in school at the moment. So it's kind of highlighted that for me again.
Thank you. And you're standing for council soon, aren't you?
Yeah, but very reluctantly.
Good luck.
I'm standing, but whether I want to win is a very different thing.
We have someone called James someone's just filled in one form with James in every box. So I'm going to ignore that one. I think that's a heckle. Let's go. Sharon, you've raised awareness about something on social media. What did you raise awareness about, Sharon?
The most recent one was on Facebook, and I was raising awareness about girls, and apologize if I insult anyone here or anyone, access to feminine hygiene products in developing nations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sadly not just in developing countries. Like there's also there's been protests around that in detention centres here not too long ago. Lots of people have said, all of us on the have prayed about an injustice. Well done, that's excellent. What about letters to change something? Let's see if I can find someone on that one. Someone else says all of us. I have to click through to get to it. I have a Marie. Marie has sent a letter or an email in an attempt to change something.
I'm afraid my camera's not working at the moment, so apologies. I don't know whether you can see me, but I can't see myself.
That's all right, we can hear you.
The Eyes of the World Assembly that CAFOD produced last Thursday, we took part in, and I gave my students the challenge within 24 hours to produce some beautiful learner voice that I could send to CAFOD. But then realistically, we can't just speak about change if we can't be agents of change ourselves. So I sent an email to Alex Sharma, who's the president of the COP26, and I've sent our learner voice asking really cheaply if our students' voices could be heard at the conference in November. We've also got one student who has sign languaged a message for the government through the Eyes of the World, and I've sent that to him. So I'm looking forward for my email response back from him.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Being on a protest, I'm intrigued by this one. It says Kath last century in brackets.
Yeah,
Kath,
I was showing my age, I think. I genuinely couldn't think of any time I've been on a protest since I was a student and we all marched against the poll tax. And I was also saying my husband, who isn't in education, he goes on them quite a lot for all sorts of different social issues. And I have to admit, I always feel reluctant because I'd be seen and be challenged possibly. And I'm not sure how that would always be a positive thing if the issue was a bit too political because of my position in school.
That's really interesting. That's something I want to come back to.
Yeah.
Let me jump to Viv. You've been on a protest?
I have indeed. And usually, yes, quite political. But the last one was pro-life.
And we can carry on. We've got petitions. We've got examples of faith leading to action, volunteered. Strikes. Let's see who's been on strike. You said this was being recorded, didn't you? So that will help when people are applying for jobs. Who's been on strike? I'm trying to look for a name that I haven't called upon yet. Sarah. There's a Sarah that's been on strike.
Yeah, I just knew you were going to pick on me, James. Yes,
I can only apologise.
It was while I was an MQT. It was very early on in my teaching career when I didn't know any better. And because the union asked me to, so I thought it was...
Oh, no, I don't think it's a terrible thing. David, you've been on strike as well.
Yes, and this is awkward because the head teacher that I worked for is in this Zoom call as well. But so I did go on strike when the government wanted to change teachers' pay and conditions. So my class was the only class in school that was not in for that day. So the head was delighted and the parents were also delighted as well. But actually the parents, some of them said, you know, good on you, that's right. And the caretaker who at the time was being particularly tricky, said that if I had turned up at school and formed a picket line, that he would not have opened the school. So, which I would never do. I just had a lovely day at home. I'm not going to lie.
And I'm sure, Julianne, were you the head at the point? I'm sure you were very proud of him. Right, let's move back on. So the point I wanted to make there is that actually we take many different actions, yeah? That when there is something that happens, there's a huge array. Julia, do you mind getting this back to the PowerPoint, please? there's a huge array of what we might do. And kind of looking at that theoretically, there was a guy called Charles Tilley, a sociologist, who wrote some really interesting stuff and gave this concept of a repertoire. Okay, so those of you that are into your music or a jazz musician, you know, you've got a repertoire of stuff you can play. Another way of thinking it would be a toolkit. Julia, if you move on to the next one, if you can. So I've put a load of things there. We can campaign, we can take action. One thing I've been doing a lot during this time is running groups online, groups of teachers, groups of young people, and the great joy I bring in bringing Sister Katrina, who is a sister who has been arrested multiple times at protests around peace and about climate change, and teachers meeting her and hearing her talk about her faith and her action and the way those things are connected. It's so, so powerful. Julia, if you would move to the next slide, please. So I tried to kind of find a way of mapping this toolkit of actions. So Doug McAdam, he was writing around Freedom Summer, which was when people were trying to get Black voters registered in the States. And he talked about two different things, cost and risk. So cost was the kind of financial risk, but the financial cost of it, but also time, potentially to your career. By doing something like going on that freedom bus, the risks that you were taking as well in terms of your personal safety, but kind of emotional risks. Della Porta was looking around what is seen as conventional or unconventional, acceptable by different audiences. What do your peers think about it? David, I found it really interesting that you were talking about various different people's perception of what you did. That's what this means. So it's how did the families see you striking? How did the caretaker see you striking? How did your head teacher see you striking? The idea of what's politically active I find very, very useful in that it kind of opens up the cause consequence box. So I think we very often deal with the consequences of things without asking difficult questions about the causes of things. Does that make sense to people? So the causes of homelessness and the consequences of homelessness. So we might work, for example, on, oh, we need to feed some people, we need to get some clothes out onto the street, we might open a shelter, but the causes might be around, well, there's not enough affordable housing, or people are coming out of the military and ending up on the streets, or lack of mental health provision. So it's a kind of deeper scraping down a couple of layers. And then finally, this idea of, do we do stuff on our own? Do we do stuff with others? Or are we in groups? So Julia, if you go to the next slide, you'll see a kind of continuum line set up that I made. Imagine like an abacus. So the point is that there are many, many different ways. There's a toolkit that we need to develop, and maybe our young people need to develop. And maybe we have some responsibility in how they pick up what different tools are available to them. Okay, so at this point, you're probably thinking, all right, James, that's true. There is a broad set of actions, but what's this got to do with school? What's this got to do with RE? What's this got to do with Catholic teaching, etc.? So we're going to go back into breakout rooms in a moment. Julia, if you mind skipping on 2, I think. Hopefully, what will appear is a load of quotes. Now, if we were in the real world, what I'd be doing now is these would be laid out on the floor, and I would invite the 62 of you to wander around the room, to read them, and to find one that resonates with you and to stand with it. And then chat to someone near it, and then I'd ask another question and you'd move and chat to them there, etc. What we're going to do is go back into our small groups. You're going to have a couple of minutes to kind of skim these things and get a sense of them. There's a bit of a variety here. So I've broken the cardinal rule and taken scripture out of context. I've also got quotes from encyclicals, from saints, from all sorts of people. And I think they capture a bit of a breadth around how are we supposed to engage with this sort of stuff. And then there's going to be some questions. Julia, on the next slide. These are the questions I'd like you to discuss. So what stands out to you and why? What are we good at in our schools? Like, what can we be proud of? What are we good at teaching? And I want you to notice that distinction. Because I will argue that we are very good at charity. Are we good at teaching the reasons why we're doing the charity? Do we make the link with liturgy? Interesting. And then where might we be falling short? So it's the kind of what went well, even better if kind of thing. I don't want you to be racked with guilt, but I do want you to think a little bit hard about these quotes. What can we be proud of? And where is there an opportunity for improvement? Now, the way that you're going to get these quotes is, with any luck, Julia is going to share in the chat now a link to some Google Slides. Is that working, Julia? There we go. So when you get back into your small group, if you click on that, that will bring up the same pictures of all those quotes and these questions. And I think we'll have another 5 minutes, please, Matthew. So let's start with what we're good at. Not what we're good at teaching, but what we're good at doing as Catholic schools. Can I have a couple of answers on that? So unmute yourself and shout it out, or wave and then unmute yourself if you'd like to.
We're good at the development of the whole child in Catholic schools. We look at them as people, but as the next generation of the faith moving forward. So we are good at that.
I feel like we should all clap every time we say something like that. Yes, brilliant, Laura, thank you. Let's have something else. What are we good at?
I think we're good at responding when there is a crisis. You know, whether it be an earthquake or a flood, or we rally round, especially if your school community is affected. Yeah, so true. And I think internationally as well, like thanks to CAFOD, I think we're absolutely superb at that. And then locally, SVP, like Mini Vinnies and Youth SVP and AT, it's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic, those kind of things. Go on, one more thing that we're good at, somebody.
I think we should make people aware all the time, Lord James. We shouldn't just jump when something's happening. It should be something that's happening all the time in the school, whether it's local, national and global. This is the problem sometimes. We jump to something, think, let's do it, and then it should be part of the learning all the time, you know. And I use the word action in faith is more important. The action shows more than people just trying to make it faith all the time, you know what I mean? I know both are important, but I think action speaks louder than words for young people.
Thank you, Terry. And I'm hearing interesting words come through. Anna H has just put in the chat where we're good about seeing this stuff. Like Terry's just reminding me of YCW and See Judge Act. Like, just give me a wave if See Judge Act is something that you think the students in your school would recognize. See Judge Act. Okay, so not many. See Judge Act is this wonderful gift of the church to kind of live in this constant cycle of seeing what's happening, seeing the needs. The judge is always a slightly dodgy word, but it kind of means discern, reflect upon through the eyes of the gospel. And it's about praying about it. It's about discerning what is an appropriate action. And then the action, I think, is the next stage of it. So it's a constant kind of reminding, See Judge Act. And then Pope Francis has given us kind of celebrate. And then I've heard recently around some of the climate stuff, lament. So See Judge Act, either celebrate, lament, repeat. See Judge Act, celebrate, lament, repeat. All right, well, what are we good at teaching? Let's continue with our positive vibe. Are we good at teaching this stuff? I'd say we're good at teaching charity. Someone agree with me? Someone unmute themselves and tell me how good we are at charity.
We spoke about that. I think we're good at raising awareness for different things and doing things or events for charity. We are trying to move away a little bit at our school from just fundraising for that reason.
And I'd say that's all through, yeah? In primary schools, we start very young. They learn charity. They learn this kind of giving, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's a wonderful thing. So I'm not saying we get rid of that. I'm saying it's only half the picture. All right, so the charity thing is important, but I think it's also preparing them so that when they're 20-somethings out there in the world and something happens, they don't say, cake sale, you know, like it's making sure that they've got the political tools, the kind of, they know who they can speak to and who they can challenge. What else are we good at? Are we good at teaching Rebecca, you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was just saying, and I think the experience might be different in secondary and primary. I think in primary, we're less driven, obviously, by the pressures of exams and things, but I think we're really good at teaching the RE alongside how they put that into action as well. So, you know, in every lesson that we do, that there's some element of how does that speak to you today, and how can you relate that to your current everyday life.
Beautiful.
James, just moving
Sorry.
Just moving on from what Rebecca was saying, we've got lots of children who they are starting to see that there's problems in our society, in our community, and being Erdington with sort of refugees and things like that. So I'm from the same school as Rebecca, who's just spoken. So she does a lot of work with Schools of Sanctuary. And one of our Year 5 children then knew that she wanted to sort of try and make a difference. And she came to us with a problem of sort of showing others that this is an issue that we can support with. I need to raise awareness of this. And she came up with an idea of tying things onto, you know, places around her community to show others that, you know, this is a problem you can support. So that's already sort of starting to happen, and I think we're quite good at that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I've got a secondary perspective on it. So 11 to 18. I think what we are good at, and I'm even particularly thinking through the GCSE, is giving them reasons for why we take action that are more than just because it's what's on social media at the moment or because it's the trendy thing to do. They can see there's non-negotiables through being Christian about how we treat people. And there's guidance in the Gospels. So putting that all into some greater context for them than just this is what people are supposed to be doing, and giving them chance to sort of reflect on that themselves. Just seeing the Catholic social teaching. That's what I'm saying, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it becomes interesting because if we kind of think of this from evangelization point of view, that sometimes it's the action that engages those kids. And to be honest, in many Catholic schools I've been in, it's engaging those teachers, the teachers that aren't necessarily kind of in line with the ethos. When they get to go and visit some asylum seekers and see a church organization doing that, they go, oh, I see what this means. Okay, and that affects the ethos. So it can go from the faith to the action, but it can also go from the action to the faith. And I know for me in my faith story, those two are so complexly and messily interwoven. The relationship between action and faith, it all goes together, and it's how do we help them unpick that? The challenge I would suggest, we're going to have to move on from this. The challenge I would suggest is the kind of linking it to sometimes to liturgy, I would say. Like I've seen one school which is fantastic. They must have stolen a shopping trolley from somewhere, and they managed to put on it a little prayer. And the idea is it goes around, and when people are making donations to the food bank, they are also saying this prayer. And then the shopping trolley was used in the liturgy. So you have this kind of going up to the altar, and the kind of join between all of the parts was just beautiful to me. That they could see the kind of the rationale, the link to faith, and the kind of active giving. The step I think that we often fail to take is the step beyond charity, to say, all right, well, why is it necessary that there is a food bank? Why is it necessary that money has to go to development? Why is climate change happening? Why, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of unpicking and going one beyond. Julie, would you mind going to the next slide, please? So the main points I want to get across so far, there are many, many ways of responding to injustice. And the other is that we are called to charity and beyond. And that and beyond thing is where I want to stay for the rest of the session. So there's something for me about announcing and denouncing. It's very easy to get caught up in the denouncing, the kind of saying, well, this is wrong. That's a no, that's a no, that's a no. And I think we get caught up in that in the kind of sexuality stuff. It kind of seeps in all over the place, this idea of saying no to something. I think the bit that we sometimes miss is the announcing. Yeah, we're called to announce the good news. It's gospel values. So we need to be saying no to the climate crisis, but yes to what? You know, what's the positive vision that we're putting across there? We're saying no to a particular style of unwelcoming to refugees and asylum seekers, but what are we saying about the welcome? What are we saying it should look like? So it's making sure that we get that kind of announcing and denouncing, both sides of that picture. And then the other key thing is, how do we teach participation? How do we kind of model, and this is why I started with your experiences, Because between you, you've done all those things. You've been on strike, you've written letters, you've been on protests, we've done it. How do we encourage ourselves, our colleagues, our staff, like to share that stuff and to make that faith link? What witness do we give to that toolkit? And sometimes we do that really well. So I don't want to sit here and say that you don't do it, because I'm sure many of you do. But I do just want to raise those questions and make sure that we're creating space for that. So many ways of reacting to injustice. We're called to charity and beyond. Right, so where do we do that? How do we fit that in? So the charity response is really interesting. So I was doing some work for CAFOD years ago, and I helped them write a book thing. It was a primary book, and I was helping write the notes, and it was a day in the life of a child somewhere. And we sent it out, or they sent it out, and then the person who I had worked with, she came back to me and said, do you know what? Like immediately it led to donation. But she had so carefully, because we'd done a session like this, and she'd come to me and we'd kind of worked out the wording, we'd so carefully made sure it wasn't about donation. We'd worked really hard to make it about learning. It wasn't about donation, it was about learning. It was understanding a day in the life, and the teacher got it and immediately raised money. Now, the raising money isn't a bad thing in itself, but what's very interesting is that this teacher's go-to response was charity. So some interesting educational theory here is that we have it. So Vanessa Andreotti, she's one of my favorites, she's kind of post-colonial theory stuff. She said that we are already conditioned by our social, cultural, and historical context. It's kind of obvious, really, but that if we as educators, influenced by the media, by our own education, and by our own learning experiences, believe the answer to injustice is solely charity, then we're unlikely to be open to a more critical approach. We're not going to offer the other things unless we ourselves expose ourselves to the other things. And then we do it, but do we keep it apart from who we are in the classroom? The most interesting version of this that I see is I occasionally get invited into kind of rich schools who are taking groups to developing countries. And it's like these educators, these brilliant educators who are normally, I'm sure, pedagogically so sound and kind of have all sorts of, they immediately stop thinking and take off the shelf the, oh, we're going to a poor country box. And they open it and it says, oh, you know, we're going to do charity, we're going to take gifts, we're going to do this, we're going to sponsor a child, and they kind of stop using all the critical thinking that they would use the rest of the time. It's not their fault, these educators. It's no one's ever said to them, well, who's the main beneficiary of this experience? Who's getting the most out of this? How do we ensure that we are thinking critically and pulling out our learning from it? The other thing is the action component in school is difficult. It's how do we manage to fit action into that 40 minutes, that hour, that whatever we have? Because we kind of think we can't, I think a lot of the time. We think, oh, politically, oh, that's not allowed. And I've got no idea if it is. All I know is I'm getting away with it. So you could get away with it too. To try and weave some of that action stuff. Paulo Freire, some of you will have heard of Paulo Freire. There's a beautiful idea in Paulo Freire about deviance credits. I like this one. And the deviance credits is, the idea is do as much of the stuff that you have to do as you can, and make sure they notice, so that occasionally you can do some of the stuff that you really want to do. So it's kind of making sure that you create those spaces to just push the envelope a little bit. And this takes us back to the radical thing, which, remember, just means roots, yeah? It's just taking us back to our roots. It's living out these Catholic sexual teaching values. So I want to very quickly just share a couple of examples of the kind of experiments I've been doing. And then Matt, who I'm hoping is still here, will kind of share his perspective on that as an RE teacher. Now, I've used this slide purposely because I'm aware I'm cheating, yeah? You see the game of Connect 4 there, like I'm not tied by curriculum and exam results, etc. You lot have got all sorts of other things to worry about. But that means I can experiment and bring it to you, and then you see what you can get away with. So the first thing is around exposure and encounter visits. Like, this is my number one thing. This is the thing that I really love. It's any opportunity I can find to link educators here or young people here with stories of activism or experiences, stories of injustice, for them to hear it firsthand. Julia, we're going to skip on through a couple of slides, I think. So I use, the key thing here is that you have to prepare people beforehand and do follow-up afterwards. Okay, so that's important. You can't just do an encounter and expect magic to happen. Julia, jump on. I think we'll skip John Travolta and they'll never know why he was there. Skip on. So I've done things like, Julianne, you're there. So Julianne has come many years now into Birmingham Prison and done music at Christmas. And she's brought her teachers in to do music on the family visiting day. And it's a kind of double-edged sword. We're going in because it's a beautiful thing and it's a service, but actually it's an incredible learning experience. We frame it in prayer. We start with a bit of prayer before we go in. We reflect on, well, how are we going to learn? What are we going to look at? We think about our feelings, and then at the end we debrief. I've done similar things where I've taken people to kind of share meals at homeless centres, teachers going through, we've taken, I think it was about 9 schools now, secondary and primary, almost all their staff in small groups have gone into St Chad's Sanctuary, which is a refugee drop-in project in Birmingham, and they've just sat in English lessons. All right, that was all they did. They went in as classroom assistants, sat in there, got to know some people, reflected on it, and then we went in and did an inset kind of taking all those ideas and saying, well, what are you going to do with it? Meet a missionary has been quite fun. So what I've done is get young people in the UK talking to a missionary in, I don't know, Pakistan, for example, where they can talk about climate change and the impact on it right now, or to someone in Fiji where we might learn a bit of a Fijian hymn, and you've got the kids here learning that and singing it, but at the same time hearing about coastal erosion. So that idea of encounter, that's a key thing. That's my first suggestion. And this summer, we're going to try and take a group of asylum seekers and a group of educators together on a kind of 3-day holiday. All right. So a festival of encounter, if you like. The next big idea, Julia, if you jump on, I suspect it's 2, is trying to work in the action component. So many of you secondary people will know about these kind of drop-down days or kind of mission days where the model is usually, here's lots of people talking about what they do, and the kids kind of hear something about refugees, something about kind of local poverty. And I've been pushing back against that recently and saying, no, let's do one issue and let's do it in depth. And let's try and see, judge, and then act. And the last hour of the day is spent where the young people choose. Are we going to go and make a banner? Are we going to write a prayer service? Are we going to write to the MP? Are we going to make something to take home? So trying to weave that action component in. And the biggest stage of that I've been experimenting with is taking groups on climate strikes. Matt, if I can bring you in now, would you mind sharing a little bit about your experience of doing some of that stuff from your perspective as RE teacher in the school?
Sure. So I work in a very interesting area called Chelmsley Wood. It has one of the lowest mortality rates in the country. And yet the real strength of the community is they have a real passion for justice, mainly because they were part of Birmingham that were kind of rejected from Birmingham. And basically when they split Solihull from Birmingham, they said to the south, the posh south, you can split from us if you want, but you've got to have the north as well. And that was the bargaining tool. And I think there's a real sense of that in the community. So they're passionate about justice for their own community, but we found that passion has really overflowed into some of the work we started to do with James. And so the diocese set up some work with the Columbans, and there were a few children, 4 children, I think, from every school who came along and got involved in the encounter visits. But I thought that wasn't good enough, really. So we asked James to do his own one with our school. And so we set up some encounter visits where we had about 100 children, 90 to 100 children across years 9 to 13, who opted for different encounter visits, which included the climate strike, working with asylum seekers, and also working on ecological kind of ideas. And we would take them along. First of all, this is the key bit really for me, is we first of all took them along to the St Chad's, the Catholic Cathedral in Birmingham. And they spent some time looking at Laudato Si and putting it all in context. Now, what I would say is that trying to convince students that we don't have a massive high percentage of Catholics in our school. Well, I say massive high, I think something like 40 to 50% theoretically. But trying to convince them all that this is all something real to them, and the learning that they have in the lesson is vitally important, is a job. It's a job to do, and it's not easy. But what we have found is by engaging so many children in the work of the climate change, it really did start to put a lot of the theory into practice, and it really started to tap into some of their inner kind of pleas for justice, their inner thoughts and their inner wishes to see a better world for their own community, whilst they were meeting people from all over the place. And then one of the best examples I can think of that is a young lady, I better not say her name, but James will know who I mean, who was pretty anti-Catholic, you might say. And so halfway through this, the kind of introduction to the experience as James came along for the day, she was like very vocal at saying, really, do we have to do all this Catholic stuff? I thought I was coming here just to hear about, refugees and stuff. Anyway, James, we kind of dealt with that a little bit, but we then put her on the phone to somebody, was it Pakistan, James, or a sister working over there in an orphanage in Pakistan. It was a live Skype link. Not long later, Caitlin was asking this sister from Pakistan, from an order out there, where she thought she went when she died. And she was asking her about heaven, and it was an amazing transformation within minutes almost. And for me, that kind of said it all, really. Somebody who all they wanted to do was get involved in social action was straight away linked into the biggest questions of life. And, I've been looking through in preparation for seeing you tonight, I've been looking through our Key Stage 3 curriculum. And we have, I don't know how you do yours, but we have so many topics which directly relate into everything we do. So the first one is in year 7, what are the big questions of life? How did we get here? What is Christianity? What are we, I'm literally reading them off term by term. What are we willing to sacrifice? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a Muslim? And I can, what I've talked to James about is having some video, some resources that we can introduce into all the classes, which would include the video that we took of them on the climate strike. It would certainly include, which I have started to do, is a video that we did with a bloke called Darren, who set up a food bank in his pub and really didn't share his life at all. He was the kind of guy that would come straight from Chelmsley Wood, and very unimpressive in terms of his being charismatic. But boy, did he rock their world when he said, "Oh, by the way, I used to be fostered, and I suppose I want to give something back." I suppose he was kind of, when they asked him why he did it. So I don't know how long you want me to talk for, James, but that's...
I need to stop you, Matt, I'm afraid.
So that's a kind of lot of where our heart's gone with this.
And let me just finish off that story about that young lady. She, after that program, emailed the Columbans directly and said, how do I start volunteering with this stuff? And I got a thing through the office saying, this young lady who wanted nothing to do with the church. It was fascinating that she then emailed a Catholic religious order and said, oh, this is speaking to my heart. How do I act? I'm aware we've only got 1 minute, so I want to just very quickly summarize. Julia, do you mind jumping on to the next one? So this is what I think I've been trying to say to you. Our faith calls us to charity and beyond that. We need to model and encourage to young people, showing them a range of different responses. And that there's loads of ways that we can do this. And that all of you, wherever you are, will have organizations that are living out these values, these gospel values, that don't see themselves as places of education. And I think it's your job to say, how could we bring groups to you, not to make a donation, but to learn, perhaps starting with staff and then trickling down to young people. I'm very willing to have questions, but I suspect we need to finish on time because you've had long days. There is my email address. I would love to hear from lots of you. Matthew, I pass back to you at bang on 5 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, James, for leading the session, and in particular the contributions from Matt there at the end and the support from Julia throughout for the IT. Really appreciate that. And this recording will be available online. And James, are you able to share your slides with us?
Yeah, you're most
that'd be
welcome.
great,
Yeah.
and we can make those available online as well. Thank you. Brilliant. Really good. I hope you're inspired to go and do other things. Just quick adverts here. We got 2 more Zoom what do we call them? CPDs. There we are. One is on music, so get your head of music if you're in a secondary school. It's Joe Boyce talking about Catholic music and quite practical, and RE coordinators. I think it'll be perfect for you. So that's on the 18th of May. We also have Professor Trevor Cooling talking about worldviews and how this will impact on Catholic schools. So a real different thing on that. That's in June. And we've also got our national conference, which is Saturday, the 2nd of October, and bookings have opened. It costs £60. We're hoping to have it face to face. If government requirements change it, it will go online, but please book. There is a limit, and it's in Altrincham, just outside Manchester. So that's the Saturday, the 2nd of October. More news there. So thank you very much, everybody, and take care.